Napoleon's Grand Army had been campaigning without respite for almost 3 years. It was time to crush the resistance of the Russian and Prussian armies and put an end to the conflict. The War of the Fourth Coalition that had reshaped the map of Europe now culminated in the Battle of Friedland. Although the Russian forces under Bennigsen retreated from Eylau, the battle ended in a draw, and both sides suffered massive losses. The Russian general knew that he had ample foodstuffs and ammunition in Königsberg, while Napoleon was away from his primary supply centres, so he retreated to the northeast. The French troops had to withdraw to their winter quarters in central Poland. To the north, the city of Danzig was still under Prussian control. Napoleon had to get rid of this nuisance, as it was a potential foothold for British and Swedish troops to open a second front against him. The fresh 10th Corps under Marshal Lefebvre besieged the city on the 27th of February. To the west, Marshal Mortier's troops were fighting the Swedes under von Essen, and managed to defeat them on the 16th of April at Belling. Sweden was forced to sign a ceasefire to keep its holdings in Pomerania, and that freed up Mortier. This spoilt the Allies' plans. The Russian reinforcements bound for Danzig on British ships didn't get any Swedish assistance. Lefebvre managed to stop these reinforcements on the 15th of May without lifting the siege. On the 19th of May, British ships with provisions for the city were captured by the French, and the city had to surrender on the 27th. Napoleon now secured his rear and was planning to move towards Königsberg to leave Bennigsen no other option but to fight. By this point, Napoleon had around 200,000 troops under his command, against 120,000 Russians and Prussians. However, unexpectedly for him, Bennigsen rushed forward. On the 4th of June, advanced columns of the Russian forces attacked the corps of Soult, Bernadotte and Ney. The first two marshals retreated while inflicting casualties to the Russians, but the primary target was Ney. His 17,000 soldiers were forced to defend against more than 60,000 Russians commanded by Bennigsen. With the river Pasvanka behind him, Ney had to be extremely careful and retreat slowly. His troops were under constant pressure from the Russian forces for 2 days, but managed to move beyond the river. Davout, who had been behind Ney, started moving his corps to his right in an attempt to confuse the Russians. On the 7th of June, he sent a messenger to Ney, claiming that his 40,000 men would soon attack the Russians from behind. This messenger was sent along a particular road that made it impossible for him to not be captured. Indeed, the message was intercepted by Bennigsen, and the Russians retreated in haste. By the 9th, the Russians were back at their well-fortified positions near Heilsberg. That was just what Napoleon needed, as he was eager to cut Bennigsen from Königsberg and the Prussian forces led by Lestock. On the 10th, Murat and Lannes attacked Bennigsen at Heilsberg. The Russian positions were well defended, but the goal wasn't to win. While the battle at Heilsberg raged for 2 days, Davout and Soult pushed Lestock towards Königsberg. On the 11th, the forces under Lannes threatened Bennigsen from the north, and the Russians had to retreat yet again. Napoleon was sure that Bennigsen would try to cross the Aller River near Friedland and move to Königsberg. He left 80,000 under his own command, while Lannes was ordered to move to Friedland quickly. The forward units of Lannes arrived in the town on the morning of the 13th of June. As Napoleon predicted, Bennigsen's forces were trying to move across the river at this location. The Russians managed to drive Lannes' cavalry out of Friedland. At this point, the French marshal had only around 15,000 troops against 60,000 Russians. Bennigsen was confident that he could easily crush Lannes without fighting the main French army. The latter was now sure that he was facing the full force of the enemy and asked Napoleon to move all available troops to assist him. The French reinforcements were en route, so Lannes decided to draw as many Russians as possible across the river. By 8 o'clock on the 14th, 40,000 Russians had crossed the river, but passing through the narrow streets of Friedland slowed them down, and that allowed Lannes to set up his defences in the nearby villages. The French heavy cavalry managed to stay in the village of Heinrichsdorf, despite artillery bombardment and attacks on their positions from 3 sides. To the south, in the forest of Zortlag, Russian infantry was facing their French counterparts. Lannes ordered his troops to fight in a loose formation, which helped as the forest was too dense for a massed attack. The Russians were only able to form a front at 9 o'clock. Their main point of attack was still Heinrichsdorf. The Russian cavalry attempted to encircle the troops defending the village, but more French troops entered the fray and drove the Russians back. In the center of the battlefield, Bennigsen tried to take Postenen, but the French infantry held their ground, and all attempts to outflank them with cavalry failed as Lannes was receiving more reinforcements, which then covered the defending troops. By 10 o'clock, the corps of Marshal Mortier joined the battle, spearheaded by the Polish cavalry, which screened Heinrichsdorf from the south. By 11 o'clock, the Russian attacks slowed down, as the French now had a comparable number of troops. From his command point on the right side of the river, Bennigsen saw that new French troops were close by. He knew that he was now entrapped, as his forces were too slow to retreat across the river while fighting off Napoleon. The French Emperor arrived at 1400 hours. After quickly assessing the situation, Napoleon ordered Ney to form up the right flank of his army, while Mortier was on the left and Lannes in the centre, with Victor Perrin's corps and the Guard in reserve. At 1700 hours, French artillery started its bombardment. Meanwhile, Ney was commanded to move forward. His troops cleared up the forest and took the village of Zortlag, but were counterattacked by the Russian cavalry, which charged against Ney's left flank. However, the French cavalry was able to drive the Russians back. Ney was getting closer to Friedland, and that is when the Russian guns stopped his advance. One more wave of Russian cavalry attempted to attack him from the left, but Napoleon sent an infantry division under Dupont, which closed up the breach. Bennigsen moved his guard against Dupont, but the French bayonets won the engagement. All that activity allowed the French to move part of their artillery and bombard Friedland. By 1900 hours, Ney was in the town, while Dupont continued moving to the north. The Russian right tried to retake Friedland and save the center of the army, but was attacked by the French units defending Heinrichsdorf. By 2200 hours, the battle was over. Around half of the Russian forces were able to retreat from the battlefield, but their casualties were around 30,000, while Napoleon lost 10,000. Chasing the enemy was impossible, as the French cavalry was utterly exhausted. On the 18th of June, Königsberg surrendered. Russian Tsar Alexander I saw no reason to continue fighting, while Napoleon wasn't ready to attack Russia. A peace treaty between France and Russia was signed on the 7th of July in Tilsit. Russia was to join the continental blockade against the United Kingdom, while Napoleon acknowledged that Finland was in the sphere of Russian interests and promised not to ally with the Ottoman Empire. 2 days later, Napoleon signed a treaty with the Prussian King Frederick Wilhelm III. Prussia also joined the continental blockade. It had to cede all its Polish lands, and the Great Duchy of Warsaw was formed. Prussia also gave away the territory to the west of the Elbe River, and the Kingdom of Westphalia, ruled by Napoleon's brother Jerome, was established here. The War of the Fourth Coalition was finally over, and Napoleon's empire was at the peak of its power. Thank you for watching our documentary on the Battle of Friedland. Napoleon will go on a little hiatus, but will be back in a few months with a second season containing at least 5 more videos. We appreciate you being with us in 2017 and wish you a glorious 2018. We will be right here providing you with the top-notch historical content. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.